It's April 28th, 2028, and this is Genealogy Chat. We're coming live from the Willenar Genealogy Center, which is a service of the Eckhart Public Library. We are here to learn a little bit about genealogy, which is studying your ancestors from the past, but genealogy also includes history of things that people did, general background, and so forth. So today we're going to discuss the other part, which is where we learn about people's lives, which enrich genealogy and history and all of that. So we have Barbara Morrow, Barbara Olenek Morrow, and she's an author of 6 wonderful books. We have several of them in our library. One of them is From Ben-Hur to Sister Carrie. It's about authors in Indiana. And then another book I want to highlight is A Good Night for Freedom. And Barbara has written 6 books. She lives in Auburn, and she is also the board president of the Eckhart Public Library Trustees. Woohoo! Thank you! And then we also have Heather Allen, who has written a wonderful, very heart-wrenching book. It's The Girl Who Said Goodbye, a memoir of Khmer Rouge survivor. And take it away, lay it on us, Barbara.
All right. All right. Well, of course, we want to welcome Heather, who I'm going to be asking some questions about her book. But first, I'd like to set the stage for our audience. This is a story set in Cambodia, which is in southern Asia. And as you see on the map there, Cambodia is in purple, and Vietnam is directly to the east. Laos sits to the north. Thailand, the big pink country there, is to the northwest, and to the south is water, the Gulf of Thailand. Cambodia has been inhabited since prehistoric times, but for about 1,000 years, starting in 800, Cambodia was the center of a great empire, and its people were known as the Khmer. The empire reached its peak in around the 1100s, and at that time they built, the Khmer people built a temple, which we know, if you're a tourist at all, is Angkor Wat. It's considered one of the great tourist destinations of the world today. After about 1100, the dynasty, the empire, started to go into weaken and go into some decline. So about 1,000-year span. In 1863, Cambodia became a French protectorate. So at that point, the Europeans step in. And the French, by and large, held sway over Cambodia until World War II, when the Japanese took control of the region. After the Japanese were vanquished in 1945, France resumed control of Cambodia until 1953, at which point the country gained its independence. But political instability remained during this period, especially as communism spread throughout Asia, notably in neighboring Vietnam, North Vietnam. In April 1975, communists, known in Cambodia as the Khmer Rouge, took control of the government. And it is in that month and year, April 1975, that this story begins. We learn in Heather's book that the Khmer Rouge sent people in cities and towns on forced marches to rural areas. They required everyone to dress in drab colors. They ignored Western medicine. They destroyed temples, libraries, and other historic buildings. And they turned to a model of agriculture that reflected 11th century farming. The result being that food production dropped dramatically and widespread famine resulted. Between 1975 and 1979, it's estimated that 2 million Cambodians, a quarter of the population, died from outright killings, starvation, and disease. A 1985 Oscar-winning film, The Killing Fields, dramatized some of the horrors under the Khmer Rouge regime. Heather's book, The Girl Who Said Goodbye, a memoir of a Khmer Rouge survivor, illustrates those horrors firsthand. So Heather, let's begin. Welcome. Tell us who this girl who said goodbye is and how you are related to her.
Okay, so Savang So is my aunt because she married my mom's brother. And so when she came to the United States, eventually she met my mom's brother and they married.
Okay.
So, yes.
And I love this part of the story because I don't know about all of you, but I love small world stories. Tell us, your mom, her parents, Mennonites in LaGrange,
Yes.
Indiana.
Yes.
And they had been doing refugee relief work. In other words, they're a couple that lives in LaGrange and they're helping bring people from overseas. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, so I'm very proud of my grandma and grandpa. They lived in LaGrange, so I'm from Fort Wayne. We would travel up there, and we always spent the weekend or spent the night there. And at a lot of our family reunions, we had different people that were refugees from different countries, some from Poland. My understanding is Poland, Russia, Vietnam, and Cambodia, and there might be some more that I am missing. But I learned that at my grandma's funeral about some of the different countries. But at our family reunions, we always had extra friends there and from different countries, and they would bring food, and it was wonderful. So my grandma and grandpa did not sponsor my Aunt Savang's family to come over, but they noticed that this family had moved to the area, and they just went out to their garden and made pies and a bunch of fresh fruits and vegetables and brought it over to the house. And the only person in that home that spoke English, I believe, was her uncle Kiet. My aunt was still in Cambodia, still in captivity, but part of her family had come over. And that's when they told my grandparents, please, please pray, we have missing children in Cambodia. So my grandparents started praying for Savang, but they didn't know her. They had no, they were just praying for her and her siblings that were still in Cambodia. Yeah.
And we're going to fast forward on this point, but just so how the connection then is her grandparents have her mom and they have a son. And so when Savang, who's the aunt who comes over, she will eventually marry this family's son.
Willis Jr.
Willis Jr. So there was Willis and Vera, the grandparents, and their son Willis, and he will eventually marry.
And I would like to put a big shout out to my Uncle Willis because during the writing of this story, the recording of the story went on for hours and hours into the middle of the night, a lot of times 2:30 a.m., 3 a.m., and he would often show up with snacks and drinks, and he was just so wonderful during the whole telling of my aunt's story. So supportive. Yeah.
So, all right. So, eventually, Savang gets here, and she and Uncle Willis marry. And so then now you're old enough, Heather, to start to get acquainted with her.
Yes.
So tell us how you got acquainted with her and how it led to your doing these recordings with her.
Yes. It had a huge impression on my life because I was probably about 7. So like I said, when I went to Grandma and Grandpa Troyer's, they didn't have television. They lived out in the country on a dairy farm, and my aunt and uncle, my Aunt Savang and her husband, Willis Jr., lived right next door, right nearby. we would stay up late at night just chatting and talking. And frequently, my sister and I would sit there and listen to everyone talk, and my aunt would tell just little glimpses and little snippets of her story and her time in Cambodia. And I remember particularly, sometimes I couldn't sleep at night because she would tell about how they had to hide their jewels when they came across the border, and how she feared for her life, and little tiny snippets of, I remember her talking about prison, and that had a huge impression on me because I feel like in U.S. history classes, I think you learn this much about Cambodia because we were not involved in that war. So we learn about World War II because the United States was heavily involved, but the Khmer Rouge waited until we got out of Vietnam, and as soon as we left Vietnam, that's when they took over. And the Khmer Rouge are Khmer people from Cambodia who took over the country.
Okay, so continue on that. Then you're a little girl, 7-year-old, hearing these little snippets of story, but then you're an adult and you think, I need to know more. So how did you and Savang decide to we're gonna tell this story?
Okay. I absolutely love this part because it just seems unreal to me. So my aunt I was at a family reunion in LaGrange County, and my aunt was there. She lives in the LA area now near Anaheim. And so she traveled to this family reunion. She had just returned from Cambodia. She went with her husband and her daughter, Jenna.
Willis.
Yes, Willis, and a couple other family members. And she had traveled to Clackamshke, the village where she grew up. And she traveled to Battambang, the city where she lived. She traveled to the Poitasat, where she was held in prison. And she took photos of all these different places. So when we were at this family reunion, she just started talking to me about her experiences and showing me the photos. And she said, Heather, I want you to write my story. I want you to record it. And at that time, we were only thinking about just recording it for her family and for me and all of the Troyer family. But when the story started unrolling, that's when we knew it had to be published. And I just wanted to add, when I was in grad school, I did a recording for my grandma of, not really a recording actually, it was just stories of my grandma when she homesteaded in Montana and her family. That's the only reason why Savang asked me to record her story. It's because of something I had done probably 10 years prior.
So Savang shows you these photos. She's come back from Cambodia. You're looking at the photos on her phone, presumably, and you two talk. So you're going to start, at least you get a tape recorder. You're going to start transcribing. You just let her start talking.
Yes.
You did some of that in Indiana, as I understand, but then you also went out to L.A., where Savang and Willis, they live out there now. We'll get into that. But then you spent time out there, did more recording, and as you were explaining to me, stuff just comes out of her. You're listening, but you're having to make sense of it too. Explain that, how that was challenging.
And first of all, I do want to say that with every word that I say today, I want to honor her and her family and her culture because I'm helping to tell her story. But she tells me, please, please share my story. Please do this, because if you don't do it, no one will. So that's why if she was in town, she would be here today. Yeah. I'm sorry. Oh, okay, so we were talking about the memories. So I did do some reading about traumatic memories, and I did do some reading about post-traumatic stress disorder, and I am not a therapist, but I read a lot about it because it was so interesting that the memories, one memory would make her think of another memory, and there were all of these connections, and they did not flow in chronological order. They did not necessarily come out in chronological order. So we spent hours and hours sorting through her memories and then putting them on a timeline. And I often stopped her in the recording process, and I often said, stop, close your eyes. What do you smell? What do you hear? What do you see? Where are you? What city are you in? You know, and then that really, I think, helped us to focus, because I am not Cambodian. I do not speak Khmer. I was a small child when all of this was going on, and so I wanted to be able to capture her memories as closely as possible. And she herself was so surprised at some of the details that she was able to pull out by using that strategy of stopping and remembering. And it just flowed so fast. Thank God I had a recording going, because there's no way I could have captured everything.
Well, and I think that shows your skill as a writer in this book, because so much is coming out, but it is, I can see if someone's just talking to you, it's here and you're going, what? And here or there. But by slowing her down, and then you were able to piece it together, you do tell the story chronologically. But you do something else that I think is effective, and that is that I think it helps keep the narrative fast-paced. There are some flashbacks. So the chapters are all short, but you're reading along, you're in the moment as the story's moving, but then a next quick chapter will be a flashback. And that is useful, and I think you and I talked about this. Why did that seem important to you?
Mm-hmm. That wasn't the plan initially. Initially, the plan was to go from 1974 to 1971, from the day the Khmer Rouge took over until the day that she was released and that she was able to come to America. But as these memories are flowing, as a reader, or as just listening to her story, it created multiple questions for me. So then I would say, well, how did you learn how to sew? Or how come you knew how to climb trees? That's amazing that you knew how to climb trees. And that would just lead to a whole nother story. Well, the recording is still going, and I'm still writing, and the depth of everything that she experienced. If you didn't know all of the background of her history and bits and pieces of the beautiful culture of Cambodia and her family. Mm-hmm. And I do want to say this too, because I have had occasional backlash of people maybe that have emailed and said, that's not my experience in the Khmer Rouge. Just occasional, a little, one time actually. And I said in the very beginning of the book, it says it in the prologue, this from Savang, this is my experience, and these are my memories, and this can in no way, encompass the entirety of everything that happened in Cambodia during those years. And people that were in different parts of Cambodia definitely had different experiences.
But why those also, the little flashbacks are useful, because Heather takes a moment to, Savang explains, again, as she said, how she learned to sew, how she learned to climb trees, how her father taught her how to row a boat. And those skills will be put very much in use and help her survive.
Yes.
And so when she is marching through the jungle, she's hiding out in the jungle, and it's things that she learned as a child. She's on a big lake, and the rowing skills.
Yes.
How she understands what's in the swamp, the muck, things she could eat, could not eat to stay alive.
Saved her life.
It did. I'm going to just digress a minute when you talk about her sewing. We should say, Savang, when the story opens, she's in Phnom Penh at the university. She's with her sister, and she's living with a brother who's already a graduate. He's an engineer, and his wife. And Savang is studying pharmacy. Mm-hmm. And so, this is a very professional family. But she has been taught these sewing skills, and they will help her. But I think it's so interesting now. She survives all this. She's in the States, and what does she do?
She sews, and she does all of the alterations for a very large company in the which I will not mention.
Well, you can say it, I think.
In the fashion district. She works at Nordstrom in the fashion district.
In LA.
In LA, yeah. And she has an eye. And I remember as a little girl, she would make Cambodian wedding dresses and send them off. When we would visit her house, there were all beautiful, beautiful dresses and beads and sequins. And and it was something that saved her life during captivity. And there are definite themes in the book. A bicycle plays a very big theme when they're first taken away, and also bringing her back to reunite with her family. Mm-hmm. And there are birds as a theme throughout the book, and sewing. So,
another chapter that just I read and I couldn't believe, two of her uncles, this would be her mother, Savang's mother's brothers, are in Europe. One is a doctor is he in France or in Italy?
One was a doctor in France.
Okay, and the other is an architect in Italy, right?
Yes.
Okay, so they're living the good life in Europe in the 1970s, well-educated, one is married. And when the Khmer Rouge take over, there's such lying, such propaganda, which I think we're kind of familiar with some of that today, I mean, especially what's happening with Russia and Ukraine. There's the Khmer Rouge say, come back and help your country. Yes. This is the communist government. They put that out there. So expatriates get on a plane and come back and immediately say what happens.
Yeah, and they are immediately taken. They first notice it on the plane. They were all instructed to meet up. I don't want to get this wrong because I helped write the book. But they meet up in Beijing, and first they meet in France or something, and then they meet in Beijing. And when they get on the plane that is going directly to Cambodia, that's when everything turns icy cold. And they notice the atmosphere changes with the flight attendants, and they suspect that something is awry. And when they fly over the country, they realize that there's no one in the streets, there's nothing going on. And these are all professionals. They didn't just reach out to anyone. They reached out to professionals to come back and use. I remember there's a chapter in the book. I wasn't prepared to read it right now, but it said they didn't come. The architects did not come back to rebuild, and the doctors did not come back to heal, and the teachers did not come back to teach. They were put in labor camps. Their families were taken from them, and they were separated. And here they came back to rebuild their country.
That sense of civic duty. Imagine these people. They've left a sense of civic duty. I'm going to come back and help my country. But they've been lied to. And just the minute they get off that plane, the one couple, they're separated from their children. And, it's horrifying, just that alone. They didn't have to do that. But they were lied to. Mm-hmm. All right, and so I talk about kind of these harrowing experiences, which of course Savang has the whole time. And I have to tell you, I'm going to make a confession here, that as I was reading it, kind of finishing up the book late one night, I wasn't quite done, but I thought I've got to get to sleep now. I turned off the lights, and I couldn't go to sleep because it was like a Grimm's Brother scary fairy tale. I kept thinking, oh my gosh, how did she survive?
Yes.
She's being brutalized emotionally and physically. I mean, she's on a starvation diet, as they all are, being forced to march, to go from camp to camp, and suffers a lot of physical hardship. Do you want to talk about just physically things she had to endure, and especially like the burning off?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was, she has shown me her scars, and after, collecting her story and just how personal everything was, she showed me her scars from when she had malaria, and the village chief, kind of like a medicine man, burned different spots all over her belly to kill the malaria, and it ended up working. And it did relieve her of that eventually, but she has scars, all like 7 scars, and then she suffered a boil, and malaria and a boil in Cambodia during those times, it could have been cured by medicine,
Yeah.
and
Some easy medicine.
no reason that anyone would die of that.
Mhm.
And of course, all medicine was just done away with. The hospitals were a place to go to die.
Mm-hmm.
And they would sometimes bury the patients when they weren't quite dead because they needed beds. And it was a horrifying thing. And that's why she never wanted to go to the hospital. And that's why her brother was able to keep her at home during part of her illness. But yes,
and home being just a little
a hut.
in a camp. Yeah,
A hut.
yeah. They're still confined, but yes.
Yeah.
It was awful. I mean, she just suffers and suffers and suffers.
And the starvation, I mean, there's a chapter about eating mice and tarantula and just horrifying
eggs,
things.
if she could find some eggs, right?
Eggs,
Yeah.
She got lucky one time with eggs. But the most horrifying thing, again, we tried to keep the gore out of it, but the mice would feed off of the dead and people who were buried very shallow. And so even then, with the mice, she didn't even want to eat mice because she knew about that. So I remember one time she shared about finding a nest of little baby mice, and that was wonderful because she felt like it was something better to eat.
They hadn't fed on the dead yet, right? Yeah.
Right. And it wasn't 100% of the time that was the case in captivity because they were fed rice, but at some points it was just baba, which is like a broth that had little pieces of rice in it. So the amount that they were fed definitely fluctuated based on where they lived and also based on the timeline of the captivity. So.
And as if things couldn't get worse, she's in a prison at one point toward the end. And she's dying in that, and they're taking people out. I mean, it's the Khmer Rouge are just so disorganized, so they can't feed anybody, so they're just killing people. She thinks it's about to happen to her, but tell us what happens and who starts to appear on the scene.
Are you talking
Vietnamese?
about? Oh, are
Yeah.
you talking about at the very
Yeah.
end of the book?
Yeah.
Yeah, and well, it's interesting because it was ingrained in them to fear the Vietnamese, because the Khmer Rouge kept telling them that the Vietnamese were coming to kill them, and in the end, they had the Khmer Rouge coming from one side and the Vietnamese coming from another, and the Vietnamese were actually there to rescue them and to overcome the Khmer Rouge, and she didn't know where to run. Because it was so ingrained in them to run away.
So it's like, you've just got fighting in all directions and not knowing who to trust. Yeah. So your aunt, the good news is, we'll give the punchline away. She survived. We told you she's alive and well with husband Willis in California, living a productive life, has 3 daughters.
She has 2 sons and a daughter and
Okay.
multiple grandkids and a grandkid on the way.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Yeah. So to what do you attribute, knowing her as you do, her ability to survive?
Wow. Well, I attribute it to, well, it's hard to say because, her other siblings died, so that's such a hard question. But I contribute it to her childhood and her ability to kind of break the rules and stand up for herself. And we talked about this at length because I hate giving it away, but the fact that she left camp and put her life on the line to try and go rescue her sister, I think that is what saved her life ultimately. That she left that camp where everyone was killed, and that she took that chance. And I just think that's such a beautiful thing. And she stood up for herself on multiple occasions.
She did.
And
She took a lot of chances.
she
too.
tried to blend in a lot
Yeah.
too. Like
Yeah.
she took on the most common name, like, you know, John or Tom or, you know,
Right.
she had multiple aliases during the
Yeah.
story, during her life.
And there were people who did come to her rescue.
Yes.
Other
Okay,
Cambodians
yes.
that they were having a hard life, but
Yes.
yet in the midst of all this
Yes.
evil, there was human kindness.
Thank you, Barb, for saying that, because I told you I wanted to mention that today. Yes, the kindness of strangers. If I would say on any given day in this world, you cannot underestimate what a small act of kindness that you give someone could end up changing their life, because that happened to her multiple times. That total strangers just didn't say something because they could have turned her in, or the village chiefs that could have sent them to prison or had their, taken their lives and showed them grace. And so many times over and over. It was such a beautiful faith in humanity in the midst of all of the evil. Yes.
So finally for me, as I thought about your aunt being forced to abandon everything that was dear to her,
Yes.
family, home, chance to pursue her education, I mean, having to literally leave behind clothes and having nothing to call her own. I couldn't help to think about what I'm watching on TV now and reading in news accounts about the Ukrainian people. Refugees, again, now your aunt was a refugee within her own country, and that was largely kind of a civil war thing. This is something broader now. But knowing that, do you think Aunt Sue Sivang has any words of wisdom for us as we try to process and think about what we're seeing, the suffering that the Ukrainian people are going through?
Yes. I can't speak for her, but the only thing that comes to my mind is just love your neighbor and show grace and kindness, and always look out for anyone who is in need. Absolutely. Yeah.
And I think she just knowing then how she wanted to get out, because even on the borderland of Cambodia and Vietnam, she wanted freedom, and she eventually was able to come to freedom, which was this country. And I'll put my own little editorial remark in here, but I think this story is really a testament to the importance of democracy, that we treasure and protect it.
Yes.
Because we saw in Cambodia, democracy was wiped away, if it was ever truly there
in
to
one
begin
day.
with.
They call it day zero. Day zero was the day that they took over.
And the guns came in.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. And the lies.
And the lies, yes.
Yes.
Well, Heather, thank you for making this effort to pursue your aunt's story. I think many of us, we have relatives or we have people and we know they've got a good story there, but we don't put this kind of effort into pulling it out of them and then going to all this trouble to transcribe it and to get it right. And you did that. So thank goodness that Aunt Sue Sivang was willing to share with you.
Yes.
But that you were willing, attentive enough to listen and then help her bring the story to all of us. So
it was an honor to, and I just wanted to honor her entire family because her sister, Coanne, I interviewed her brother, Tay, and her mother, Yakoi, who is so wonderful and who still lives with her. And yes, she's wonderful. Grandma Yakoi, yes.
And 2 of her siblings were killed. So
Yes.
there were family members who perished during this period.
Yeah.
So. All right. Well, thank you. It's
You're
been a
welcome.
delight, and I highly recommend the book, but I would suggest that maybe you don't read it after 9 o'clock at night if you want a good night's sleep.
Yes, that's probably a good idea.
All right. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Do you want to mention your website?
Yeah. Okay.
Do you want the music on?
Probably, well, that's fine. Do you want to mention your website?
Yes, please.
Go ahead.
Oh, you want me to mention it? Oh, okay. Yes, my website is heatherallenauthor.com, and I'm happy for anyone to contact me via the website because I'm happy to do book talks. I've spoken at churches and various places, schools, and book clubs, just personal book clubs in people's homes. So, yeah.
So I want to thank you, Heather and Barb. This is a wonderful story. Want to let everybody know that we have a copy of this book in our collection, and you can check it out and read it anytime. Wonderful book. The Girl Who Said Goodbye, a memoir of the Khmer Rouge survivor. And tell us again your website, please, Heather.
Yes, it's heatherallenauthor.com.
Thank you. And I want to thank our studio audience and the ladies for being here, and you viewers at home, and of course my 2 wonderful men behind the scenes, Zach Hymack and Andrew LaVarghetta. And Heather, please, one more time, tell us the name of your website.
Oh, heatherallenauthor.com.
Thank you. Next week, we will be talking with a group of DeKalb High School students who spent a lot of time at the YMCA's Teen Canteen. And one more time, what's your website?
Oh, okay, one more time. It's heatherallenauthor.com.
Thank you. And we'll see you next week. Goodbye.